Welcome to Inside the War Room. Ryan Ray here, as always. Bringing on a gentleman I've recently got to know. I don't want to say fairly well, but I've recently got to meet and interact with, and have enjoyed these conversations. Adebayo is originally from Nigeria, but you were all over the world. And so, why don't you introduce yourself better than I can on kind of your background, where all you been, and what all you've seen on some levels, and we'll kind of jump off after that.
Thank you, Ryan, for having me, and I really do appreciate it for having these conversations. A lot of things are done, a lot of progressiveness are achieved through conversations, and ability to kind of see eye to eye on issues and look at our differences and where we meet. So, Adebayo Adeleke is my name. I'm a retired uh, U.S. Army officer. I'm a veteran, combat veteran, served for 20 years, retire, and live in Dallas, Fort Worth area. I live in Midlothian, but my office is in Allerton. Since I retired, I've started my own consulting firm, and I also lecture at Southeast State University on leadership and operations management, so to say. So, and I do talk on diversity and inclusion, operations supply chain management, operations management, and anything that has to do with leadership and strategy. So that is pretty much who I am in a short. And I do have a nonprofit. I think we met talking about my
Yes.
nonprofit. I do have a nonprofit called Rising Leadership Foundation, which a lot of you get to know. So next, and pretty much headquarters in Dallas, Fort Worth area as well, trying to bridge leadership gap in underserved communities in Texas, African immigrant communities, and also in the continent of Africa. So there you have it. That is me in a short.
Okay, so help me just from obviously I was born and raised in America, so just a question I thought of when you're talking here. Being from Nigeria originally, coming to the U.S., joining the army, is that um, was there any reason particularly did that help with citizenship, or you just got over here and said, you know what, I wanted to do the army thing? I just uh, I've heard of foreign people, foreign citizens that have migrated to the U.S. being in the military, but I never really asked what the process was like. Is it harder or easier? I just genuine curiosity there.
So when I joined the army in 1998, and I was already spent a year in college already, and the plan was to initially, I mean, that was the army motto back then is be all you can be.
Mm-hmm.
I was watching the Mets and the Yankee games, and was like, hey, I saw that the be all you can be. I went to the recruiting station. I just pretty much got into the U.S. then. So it's I really don't have much or do not know much of American culture. So I'm still getting my feet, getting my feet wet. And also, then I joined the military. So it was the two things happened. I was trying to learn about American culture and also
Mm-hmm.
trying to learn about the military culture. They're completely two different things. So for me, it was trying to learn the nuances that is there in American culture, and then there's nuances
Mm-hmm.
uh, in the U.S. military. Now, granted that a lot of people that are in the military are from the U.S. They were born and raised here.
Mm-hmm.
They know a lot of this stuff. They've done junior ROTC in high school and all this stuff.
Right.
They was coming from Nigeria. I knew nothing about military. Period. So I have to learn so much. And I don't think it was. And to be honest with you, I joined because they offered me to pay for my college. Just like, why not?
Okay.
Why would I kind of amount all debt when I can serve 4 years and I get overweight? So what I did was, can you still see me? All right. What I did was I just I just just joined. I was like, you know what, whatever it is, after 4 years, we'll see. We'll see where the chips lie.
Right.
And I fell in love with it, and after 4 years, I'm like, wow, this is quite interesting because after 4 years, I was a paratrooper, I was airborne, jumping out of planes.
Oh wow.
Military was completely different from what I thought it was. It was like a family, the
Mm-hmm.
brotherhood,
Mm-hmm.
you know, people love you, people from all walks of life, people from different countries, merged in the same place,
Right.
and fighting for a common cause, fighting for a greater good, and regardless of whatever you've come from, you are bounded by this bond being in the military. So I really, I bought into it. I love it, and that was it. And I said, after 4 years, like, you know what, sign me more. That's it. And 20 years later, man, I was like, wow, I've been a blessed career, and I've been very appreciative of it.
Okay, well, good. That's helpful to know. So, um, you are from Nigeria, so that's Western Africa. I've never been to that part of Africa. I've met some folks from there at various functions and whatnot. I know some better than others, but South Africa is kind of Southern Africa is kind of where I have my connections at. And one of the things, when you think about Africa from the U.S. side of things, is it's hard to just kind of imagine the scope of how big Africa is. So the U.S. I think can fit inside the Sahara Desert, basically, which is north of where you were in Nigeria. So Africa is a big place, and then when you go there, at least in South Africa and Zambia and those places, it's not as I understand it, it's not like going from Texas to New York where there is differences. There can be radical changes inside the population. And from the U.S., where you have a multitude of ethnicities, we continue to look at Africa and say, well, Africa is predominantly black people. Most countries are, I mean, you get above the Sahara, it's a little bit different, but sub-Saharan Africa is predominantly black Africans, and but it's not. Well, it is, but the ethnicity and I can't speak. The diversity is really astonishing. The languages and the cultures and the tribal mentality of some, and then the first world mentality of others. I can imagine coming from at least South Africa, coming to the U.S., how different it would be. Is it similar to? Is that similar in Nigeria? Did you have those kind of broad differences inside the country of Nigeria?
Absolutely. I think Nigeria has about 500 or so ethnic groups,
Wow.
and it's quite diverse.
Hmm.
Uh, um, and for us, we really don't see much of it because it's part of who we are, you know, and we really don't uh, kind of pay attention to only the fact that you don't speak some of the languages, and that could be, but there's always a way that we all communicate, regardless if I don't speak your language. We have a pidgin English,
Right.
which is English that almost everyone kind of pick it up along the line. So, though of course we all share the same skin color, but for the most part, it's not that different from people that have different skin colors. Though
Right.
the
Uh,
languages apart and our culture sometimes is wire apart too.
right.
But in value system, I think for the most part we share certain values.
Mhm.
There are certain set of values that are common across different ethnic groups, and there are some that are completely
Mm.
uh, off the chart. So it's different. It's just like cohabitating with different people from different parts.
Mm.
Though for example, the Northerners they speak different language, they have different culture, and
Right.
they do the South as well. So they live, regardless of how much they stay with folks in the South, they're still trying to maintain their cultural integrity. So that's quite, it's quite unique. But the fact of the matter is, when you migrate from a different continent to the other, chances are you see the people from different colors. But in
Yeah.
Africa, you share the same color, but the cultural nuances, the ethnical nuances are still there. Nothing has really changed. Yeah.
And I think for a lot of Americans, that's kind of the problem is that if you live in America, you're used to there obviously geography plays a difference in the culture, but also we have a multitude of races that are all over the place. And you look at like India, which is very similar. There's all kinds of different ethnic groups inside of India, but they all, from the outside perspective, like, well, okay, well, I can't tell the difference. It's like, well, no, they're speaking different languages. They have different, they might have some common ethos amongst them. I think that's part of the problem that Americans face is that until you get outside of the borders of the U.S. and you go to countries or continents where the skin tone, to use that term, is very similar. It's hard to appreciate the nuances of these cultures, and even then you realize just how little you actually know about those countries. Like I now know how little I know about South African mindset because I understand that there's all kinds of people that I will never interact with, and how they think and how the South Africans think about them, and then you bring in like South Africa and Zimbabwe, and so I think it's very hard for the Americans, and that's one of the things like talking to someone like yourself is very helpful because, um, you are very gracious with your answers, but B, you don't know what you don't know, right? And so, trying to open those eyes and let people understand that.
Exactly. And the fact of the matter is, traveling is the greatest teacher. Pretty much, you learn so much by travel, regardless of how much the books the kind of knowledge you can gain from the books and YouTube and whatnot, but nothing like experiencing the moment. And oftentimes, I think Americans, for the most part, are guilty of this. We really don't travel.
Yeah.
We really don't travel. We are comfortable, and I think I was traveling in Oklahoma one time, and I ran into a lady at the gas station, and she's telling me she lives about 20 miles away from where I was, and she hasn't been to Oklahoma City or so like that in years because there's nothing she's going to do in Oklahoma City. Everything is around her. They have Walmart and whatnot. And
Right.
you travel across America, you find people sharing the same story about there's no need for them to travel outside the confines of American borders. So I find that amazing. And that's why most people believe that Americans, if you go outside, because Americans are quite arrogant because they think they are the best, or they think they're nothing but America. But it's just the fact of the matter is, I mean, there is a sense of confidence in every American, but at the same time, because you have everything that you need to survive around you, what's the essence of try to make change to that? So I see from both sides as
Mm.
well, but I believe that we as Americans, we can have a better view of the world by kind of traveling. You've traveled, you've been to Africa,
Mm-hmm.
I think more than I do myself. And you see that as you travel across Africa, you see that there's differences. And as you see difference, so as you communicate, if you've been to Africa before, you will tell people like Africa is a continent, not a country.
Right.
Because you often hear that, like, oh, the country of Africa, and I was like,
Yeah.
no, Africa
Oh,
is a continent.
right.
It's quite amazing that when you tell people that they say it authoritatively, like they know that Africa is a huge,
Mm-hmm.
and the more you travel, the more you get exposed, the more you feel, the more you understand the people, the language, the religion. So about when you talk about certain things that pertains to certain group of people, you can talk intelligently, you can talk passionately about them. You're not just viewing them from what you read from the book. Is how you feel about them. There's two different things, because when you read about something and when you were there is a completely different thing. But the way you're gonna defend and articulate passionately when you're there, part of the process, it's completely different when you read about it in the book. You
Well,
know,
yeah, let me hop in there because that's interesting. Because I'm actually reading. I'll put it up here. I don't know if you've ever heard of this book, Africa, by a guy named John Reeder. It came out in the '70s, and the first couple chapters are about, uh, you know, thousands of years ago. It's not really relevant to what I'm interested in, but I'm kind of skipping around the book, and so I'm reading right now
okay.
about the origins of the slave trade on Western Africa. Okay, and I found it astonishing. Just kind of some of the things that are in here. Not it's most of this stuff at a high level I understood, but just some of the details. And I'll give you one because this is taps into what you're saying. Um, they were talking about going and how they would acquire the slaves, and then they would force the slaves to learn Portuguese, and then they'd use the slaves to navigate along the coast. And I thought that was interesting because on some level, you're sitting there. This is back 14 whatever, so we don't know anyone who's in that time, right? So you're sitting there, you go, okay, just imagine, just imagine for a second, um, if you were in the tribal region of Africa. The countries were a little bit different back then, so it's kind of hard to figure out exactly where all these places were. But if you were there and you were, enslaved or up for slavery or however that system was working, but you spoke the language, you knew the terrain, you knew all of the things that were going on, and then one day someone comes in and sells you to a country where you can't speak the language and you can't do that. And a lot of times is right now with kind of in America, they talk about the history of slavery and stuff like that. I didn't thought about that. I never thought about it from that perspective. That a lot of times in America, people say, "Well, slavery originated in Africa," and da da da. It's like, well, it, on some level, there's obviously that's true, but it's interesting just to think about the fact of leaving your country, your land, all that you know exists in 1452, going to a foreign land on a ship that you've never seen before, and then being forced to learn the language, and then having to come back and interpret that. Um, that person's perspective on what happened, you cannot get from a book. You know what I'm saying? Like you cannot
Exactly.
pick that up in a book.
and I think you and I, in our previous conversation, we've discussed this about, optics and how we view things in life. Unfortunately, none of us were around during the slave era. I think maybe if you have people that were in their 90s now, maybe they were still probably around during the slavery. And it's
Mhm.
for the most part, I mean, though slavery has ended, but at least
Yeah,
the
the rough, yeah, the post slavery, right.
procedure is still kind of in the 1910s,
Mhm.
1920s, and beyond. But what is quite astonishing is the fact that the whole era of slavery, what happened, and I have a different view, more or less of a contrarian view of what might have happened in the past. Knowing what my culture is and
Mhm.
what African culture is as a whole. Um, there has to be a lot of things because uh, there are different ways of which different depending on who you talk to, either the Portuguese, the Dutch, or the English, how they acquire slaves.
Mhm.
The English were quite different
Well,
because
and this, just to be clear, this is the Portuguese, so this would be like the 14. This is well before anyone else was there, so this would be the.
English are quite different because they understand the diplomacy.
Mhm.
English is probably one of the most diplomatic, the British Empire, probably one of the
Mhm.
most
Right.
diplomatic empire during that time because they know how to, they study the culture. They really, hardly would they go in there and capture people. They rather use kind of, is it, I mean, they kind of use those elements to convince their local leaders to give them people.
Yeah.
So a lot of people are acquired by the Africans actually giving them up, you
Yeah.
know,
Yes.
whereas some were taken forcefully from their land. And
Right.
so now let's fast forward to now the people that started when they landed in America or in the Caribbean.
Mhm.
It's quite torturing, and my heart bleeds for a lot of people that have that kind of mentality throughout their life, throughout their bloodline. Because imagine everything you know to be true was ripped away from you.
Mhm.
Then you were put in the ship for how many days on the sea?
Yeah.
Some survived, some did not.
Yeah.
You
Terrible
know,
conditions.
terrible conditions. And then you landed, and then you were forced to. They took away your name, your identity.
Mhm.
They
Mhm.
gave you one,
Mhm.
and I know, and it's you know it's quite hard for who we are. We all have a source, and if I ask you, Ryan, you know exactly where you're from, your great
Mhm.
grandfather, your grandfather, and all. But
Mhm.
for some of them, they really don't because the best they knew is that they've just been ripped away from their land,
Right.
and they have learned a language,
Mhm.
they don't want to learn. It's completely different from them. So it must be hard. It must be extremely hard for them, and for them to continue that and that trajectory over hundreds of years. Uh, I mean, like 1400. Imagine 1400,
Yeah.
1600,
Right.
17, 1800s.
Right.
So if we put it in perspective, and my contrarian view is the fact of the matter is, and I don't know if we share it during our last conversation, is the fact of the matter is, as horrifying as slavery looks today,
Mhm.
because we know better.
Mhm.
If we look at slavery by using today's lens,
Mhm.
oh my God, people that lived in that era, they are just monsters.
Mhm.
Fact, right?
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah.
But how can somebody enslave another human being? But back in those days, people in that era they never thought themselves as monsters. It's just what
Right.
was in vogue of the day. Slavery
Right.
was economical and whatnot. So oftentimes, if we continue to look at the past for what it is the past. It's horrifying. But if we use today's lens to judge what is in the past,
Mm.
we run the risk of losing a lot because it is, we will never get it right. I mean, and imagine 50, 100 years from now, what we are doing, those folks will look back and say, wow, these people are out of mind. They're out of their mind, you
Right.
know? And so it's never, I'm not saying it's never, you cannot correct the past by looking at it from the future.
Mhm.
Am I making any sense?
No, no, no. I think you're. I think I agree with. I think we're on the same page here on some level. I think what I like to do. So like when I was reading this book, it's mainly because, you mentioned, I'll go back to something you said a minute ago. You talked about Africa as a country versus a continent. So if I'm speaking, and I think I may have sent this to you in a note at one time, I said, I'd like to talk about Africa. And I hate saying that term, but it's just the easiest way to say it. And I'll say, so if I'm talking to someone who's from Africa, I'll usually make that distinction. So I want to talk about Africa. I hate using that as a term, but I'm trying to talk about I'm trying to say, I'm talking about a large issue. Um, because what I know is that West Africa, East Africa, South Africa, Northern Africa, above the Sub-Saharan Africa. There's all these divisions that you guys, how you think about geography, just like we would here in the States. And so when you look at how you talk about things, I think we have to learn that there's ways to talk about things that are helpful, and then there's ways to talk about things that aren't helpful. So if you want to talk about the slavery issue, um, what I want to understand is I don't need I will never know all of the intricacies of how it originated in Africa and what all of the sailors were thinking and what all the slaves were thinking. I'll never know that. That's obviously, well, I'm not a historian, enough time for all that. And even if I did, there's things that are unknown. But I do want to say, for someone that says, well, okay, if someone says, well, U.S. slavery was bad, but it originated in Africa. Okay, that's a historical fact. Okay, okay, we're not disputing that. I would just simply submit that for the man or woman who's in Africa, that was enslaved in Africa, if you were going to be enslaved today, talking to this random person, would you rather be enslaved in this country where you know everything, or be sent to China and be enslaved? Which of those two would you have? Because we have to we don't I don't want to spend our lives when we're sitting here trying to nuance, who has more guilt, who has more responsibility, because those things happened hundreds of years ago, especially the time period I'm talking about. You're a little bit more closer where you're at. Um, but it is also helpful to begin to understand that it's not flat, right? It's not as flat as saying a white guy in Alabama bought a black slave off of a ship, but that's justified because of that and that and that. It's not, there's a lot more nuance here, and today's problem we have today is we're not able to have nuanced conversations where I can say, hey, listen, I've been in South Africa, everyone or 80% of people there are black, but there's a lot of different culture, and you understand that I'm not trying to be offensive. You understand what I mean. You go, oh, here's a guy who's saying that culture in Africa is just different than it is in the US, and part of that's hard to understand. So I want us to be able to have conversations where we understand that sometimes we're saying blanket statements and sometimes we're trying to nuance it, but we give each other a charitable interpretation so that we can work through issues. Does that make sense?
It does, and I think if I hear you correctly, your position is really what happened in slavery, where and how it happened is probably uh, historically is quite important. But as we continue to move forward, is not necessary. It's about how we deal with what we have, uh, and in as much as you know, having this conversation is quite tough because if you don't say it the way I want to hear it,
Yes.
then you're being insensitive, you're being a racist or whatever. But
Yes.
oftentimes you don't know how to say it because it just not never occurred to you how those things is going to land or how you feel about it.
Right.
And how will I know how you feel about it if you never express it?
Yes.
So, all these things are going around about, people are kind of shell and they kind of walk on the shell. I understand that there are certain, we have to be quite sensitive about how we treat each other and how we talk about, how we talk to each other rather. But oftentimes we also cannot afford to shy away from real conversation,
Mm,
constructive conversation about how we get there and how we move forward. Africa as a whole is an awesome continent.
mm, mm.
And even you to your larger question is the fact that do we want to enslave or not? I don't think. I mean, all things being equal, having what we have in Africa, and if this thing was reset, I think everyone would like to be in Africa if the world was not colonized and everyone, because is the breadbasket of the world, is the natural resources are there. And to be honest with you, I think it should be all the way around. Like, you know what? I want to be a slave in Africa. You
Well,
know, because if we're talking about being a slave, I mean, we shouldn't even be no. There should be no. And I don't know how we got that. I don't know how. And I think this has been happening since the creation of the world. Is the fact that there should be no. I believe wholeheartedly that our problem in this world is our problem in this world started when somebody believed that he's better than somebody else, or
mm-hmm.
his race is better than somebody else. And this is not white against black. This has started from the onset of
Yeah,
time.
right.
That's why we have different empires conquering another empire. They believe they're better than them.
Mm-hmm.
One is superior to them and whatnot. And these, as of course, at the larger, that's the larger issue.
Mm-hmm.
At the strategic, at the 10,000,
Mm-hmm.
bird's eye view to now to what we are dealing with here now. And I think when you have two or three people from different backgrounds, it's bound to happen, especially in large amount.
Mm-hmm.
People believe are my people, our people, all those kind of things. And once you start doing that, then you create a lot of animosity, you create a lot of segmentation, and all this thing kind of comes up. So yes, Africa is a beautiful land. You've been there before. I lived there, and we have a lot of, we are different. The Eastern folks are different from the Southern folks, and the folks from the, Sub-Sahara are quite different from people from the North. Actually, some people from the North don't even consider themselves Africans. They consider
Right,
themselves,
right.
so, and that's the beauty of it, and certain people have certain behaviors. Nigerians, for example, we're the most populated African country, actually the most populated black country in the world,
Mm-hmm.
over 100 million people, right? And I don't think anywhere Nigerians goes, we always dominate and take over. We have these aggressive abilities and in
Mm-hmm.
everything. And you can spot a Nigerian from a midst of a lot of people, a lot of Africans. You know which one is Nigerian, which one is not, because of our bravado, our attitude
Mm-hmm.
towards life, how we carry ourselves. I'm not saying the rest don't have that kind
Sure.
of bravado, but just the fact of the matter is those are the attributes that comes with being a Nigerian. And so is the rest of Africans as well. They're very proud. I mean, we Africans, regardless of whatever you are from Africa, you're very proud of your heritage.
That's it. Very true.
And
Very true.
it's very, very, it's one thing that is common, it's a common denominator across different ethnic groups in the continent of Africa, is that we are proud of who we are and where we come from. And
What?
regardless of how much you kind of, and I think that's why a lot of resistance during this, I mean, if you, depending on the literature you read of slave trade, a
Mm-hmm.
lot of Africans that were enslaved, was very difficult for them to break them through because of their deep passion uh, and attachment to their source, to their roots. It's not something you'll be able to break away. And for them, they needed to assimilate. They need them to speak the language. They need them to understand so that they can plow the land, all those kind of things. But for them, that language is still necessary for them to communicate. So it's when you look back, you realize that wow, it must have been tough for them, because knowing fully well that they came from Africa, you can't break them easily because of the attachment and the pride they have in their culture and their heritage.
Yeah, no, it is. It is. It is interesting that you brought the pride thing because, um, I've been around Africans where they will be in the United States and they'll be saying, "Wow, this is great. Wow, this is wonderful," and then they'll go, "But it's not insert African country here." And as American, you're like, "That's interesting because it seems that this is better than insert country here." But they have that natural kind of pride in their home country that's very very thick, very rich. And in the U.S. right now, obviously, we're going through. Is it okay to have pride in your history or not? Which is an interesting opposite, kind of a dichotomy, because African kind of has this very rich, deep history and pride, and obviously the history from any country has plenty of ups and downs, and in the U.S. is struggling with its identity.
And I don't know if you've been around a lot of Africans. They can criticize their government more than anybody else.
Mm-hmm.
They can laugh against their government, but they'll be the first one to stand and say, you know what, I'm not. This is who we are, regardless of how bad and crazy our land is. We are
Yeah.
still African.
No, that's yeah.
And,
When you say that, it definitely
and
rings
that
true.
is what is expected for every citizen
Mm.
in every country. You can lash out against your government for for what they've done or what their past history has. I mean, they're not going to shy away. Slavery is a bad defect. It's a birth defect of America.
Mhm.
And it will continue to haunt America for a long time. But the attitude we kind of show towards it will kind of determine who we are as Americans of the future. Do we accept our shortcomings of how we participated in slavery and say, you know what, we will try our damn best to leave a better legacy that, though we cannot change the past, but we can change how we live for the future. And I think that's the ultimate goal of the idea of America, that we as a people, like President Bush said in a speech he gave it as it's very difficult. The idea of America is to bring people of different races and tongues and under one nation. That in itself is quite complex. And then to promise them liberty and justice for all, another complex issue.
Mhm.
Because the way you view leadership and the way I view completely different, you know. Completely. I mean, the way you view liberty and justice is completely different from different
Yeah.
part of the world.
Right.
It's important that we, continue to, live the best. I mean, we always look for the best part of ourselves. I mean, slavery has happened,
Mm.
long gone. We've moved past it. Unfortunately, we still have some residual effect of it in the system. And we have to do our damn best to clean it up and move together as a nation. But now, this idea of we cannot do anything better until we fix this or this. No, we like one of my bosses used to tell me, Bayo, you can look at your past, but do not stare at it.
Yeah.
Don't stare at it, just look at it, learn from it, and you keep moving. And I think what we are doing right now is that we are staring at our past rather. And the more we stare at it, the more we dwell on the thoughts of it, and a lot of nuance, a lot of bad thoughts going to coming across our mind. And that's what I believe we're seeing across nation right now, because we cannot, if we have this reclamatory kind of attitude on both sides, we cannot move forward. You did this to me, we did that to you, we did it to you, and everything is just not is not is not way of moving forward. So America is a very at an interesting point. But the great thing, the better news is the fact that every time America has been on edge like this, the country always come out better and stronger than before. And I'm hoping this will continue. This will be our legacy as Americans, that regardless that we have our differences, we always find a way to make it work.
Yeah, I think you're right there that the issue is not reading a book on slavery or even talking about the issue. Is that the looking versus the staring, right? As you said, we get to a point to where there's a lot of thoughtful conversations that we can have, but we don't want to have those. We just want to stare at it, and we create this animosity. And that's one of the things I found with dealing with people from around the world is you know, I actually can usually have better conversations with those people than I can with some Americans because if you just kind of start off with, listen, I don't know much about Nigeria. Here's what little I know. Will you help me out? There or insert country here. They'll be happy to tell you. And then you say, okay, listen, I'm asking a dumb question here. You could talk for hours and learn and have great conversations. And we've kind of lost that ability in the U.S. just to be able to have friendly countries. I'm curious, just from your perspective, because you've done a lot of international travel. Do you find that where other countries are over your 20 years of kind of being in the army and traveling around? Is this something that's unique to the U.S. or is it just a time and place type situation? Or no, you would say no. If you're in this spot, I was here for a few months or years, and those folks really struggled just to have honest, good conversations as well.
The fact of the matter is, the view of Americans, when I travel the world, I travel as an American.
Right.
Often people get to know me, you're not American. I was like, yes, I am. You know, uh, but you have an accent. They say, yes, so is everyone in America has it. Which is fine. Yeah?
That's a good
Everything,
point.
I
I
mean,
like
if I'm in Asia and you're telling me I have an accent, then uh, to you, as I'm having an accent, so is the real, whatever, who you consider a real American, quote unquote, talk to you, the person
right,
have a in context of Asia,
right.
So I air that a lot. And the view of America around the world is portrayed by the media. The media has, I mean, I'm telling you, I was talking to a friend that's like, whoever owns the media outlet around the world, they have they are probably one of the most powerful
Mm,
platforms to shape people's mind. They shape the way people think, people read, people assess, people like, people hate. I mean, it's just it's mind blowing. So, when you travel around the world and people get to know you, when you go to people that are oppressed and you as an American soldier get there, they see you as a liberator. They see you as somebody that is coming out. Oftentimes, in some countries, they don't see you, they see you as an invader. You have to
mm,
also understand that because that is how what they've been portrayed to. But the more they get to know you, the more they kind of understand like, wow, they're not really an invader. They're just helping here to help us. And different parts of the world, depending on where you go and how the US has played a major role in their lives, will determine how they view them. So oftentimes our views are short-sighted in a way that is the way we have been portrayed to the rest of the world, or the way some of the stuff. I went to a country that an American rape a child over there. You can be rest assured how they feel about America in
mm,
that part of
right.
so and how the way America as a whole is viewed is all dependent on what America is to them, how they view America through the media, or what America personally has done for them or hasn't done for them. So and then you have to live with that. And oftentimes you try to correct the best you can, and people change their mind. People do, and you cannot. I mean, I believe that's a God-given right, their own mind to choose what
Mm,
to be, not to believe. So it's quite interesting. So having traveled the world, I've had different reception, warm reception, fantastic reception, and not so good reception. And these are just, I mean, you're not going to be loved by everyone around the world. You just do your best and do the best you can to help humanity, and then you move out.
yeah. And, one of the things it feels like that's happening, you talk about the media. We recorded a show we're going to run by the time this one runs, it would have ran. And I was talking about the frustration with, you know, some of the things in the media right now because, and I've said it before, I said again, I didn't vote for Trump, not vote for Trump, won't vote for Biden or Clinton. So just not vote for any of those people, just so you know. But there's an article talking. John Bolton just released his book, and I've been going through it. And he talks about in the book that Trump doesn't really care about the humanitarian atrocities in China. That he's just trying to get the soybeans and try to get reelected. So I was reading an article about that, and so it's talking about Trump doesn't care about this stuff. And then the next line was the EU has a decision to make whether it will pick the U.S. or China. And it's like, whoa, 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 whoa. You just got through claiming that China is a human rights violator. And your next line is, and then you criticize Trump for not caring. Your next line is the EU will have to pick the U.S. or China. It's like, whoa, 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 whoa. See, this is what frustrates me. We can criticize Trump or praise Trump or whatever, but we go from Trump ignores human rights violations to the EU has to pick the US or China. Well, by your own admission, China's a human rights violator. So that's a no-brainer. By what you just said a sentence before then. So why are you not criticizing the EU for even considering China? Now, if I were to say that to the author, they'd probably, well, I didn't. No, 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 no. This this is the type of stuff that from the media perspective, it frustrates me because if we want to criticize Trump for not being concerned about human rights, that's fine and dandy. But you're criticizing him for not being concerned about human rights in China, and then you're saying the EU must choose between the U.S. and China by what you're saying. That's not even a choice. And so the media paints things for Trump and against Trump. I'm not trying to. We can talk about the for Trump stuff as well, but those are the kind of things that are frustrating because you're acting as if you care about the human rights issues when you really don't, because when the EU picks, it's just simply between U.S. and China and a political. It's a anyway. I'll quit rambling, but stuff like that with the media does frustrate me because it doesn't actually get to the heart of the conversation um, about how do we address these issues in China, and is just being transactional with China might be the best way. It might not be, but those are conversations that we can have.
So, I mean, now talk about the issue of China and the US government role. Um, the world has changed from what we used to from the After World War II, the pecking order, the world order has changed, and technology has really reshuffled things around. But this idea of what we want in ourselves, kind of projecting it out on others, I think is a very laudable idea, but I don't foresee it happening the rest of the world. So if we have to say that certain people have to meet these criteria before we do business with them, before we talk with them, we're going to run out of countries to partner with.
Exactly.
So
Exactly.
in as much as we do not understand. I mean, you don't by our standard, we have human rights. We know what human right is, and oftentimes the rest of the world do not share that view.
Hmm. Yes,
Uh,
exactly.
we want these things to be done these ways, got it, but trust me, we don't operate that way. We want to do this certain way. So it's either you operate with us or you don't. But and it's not binary. The world is not binary.
Thank you. Thank you.
Uh, it's the fact of the matter is there are a lot of nuances in there because they have human rights issues. They abusing human, different kind of, uh, ethnic groups. They have some ethnic issues and everything and all those kind of stuff, depending on what kind of story from China you're listening to. But does that make overall the whole China as a country bad, or we
No.
cannot do this with them? So do you have to look at all these nuances? And I'm not advocating that because somebody might be listening to this. I'm advocating to do business with country that violates human rights. Absolutely not. But what I'm saying is there has to be these things are not binary. There has to be deeper conversations. It's not like voting on the Hill or in the Senate. Is it that you yes or no? No, there are in betweens. There are in betweens that complicates the matter. That some oftentimes, you didn't vote for this. I'm like, no, I would love to vote for this, but there are certain stipulations in that bill that I do not feel comfortable about. But people don't listen to that. People just want is either you do this or that. So
Mm-hmm.
now, my question to people that write about this is the fact of the matter is what is your end state? Is human right making sure compelling China to do human rights. I mean, to kind of, you know, kind of toe the line when it comes to human rights issue through the way of I'm not going to do business with you, or you do transactions with them and encourage them to, be very nice to their folks. Which
Mm.
one do you think is more approachable?
I'll tell you which one is better. Would you rather live in North Korea or just about any other country in the world? And what does North Korea not have? It does not have trade with the other nations. And
Yeah.
that's how the North Korean government keeps their atrocities on their people.
I mean, we know
Right?
exactly. Yeah, exactly. The world at large know what is going on in North Korea. But my question is, I think a
Well,
lot.
let me be clear. So what I'm saying is that the way that North Korea continues to be a human commit atrocities is that we do not do business with them.
Mhm.
Therefore, there is no outside influence.
Yes,
So, if you want to say that we don't want to do business with human rights violators because they're bad people, I understand that. But to be clear, if you don't do business with them, they become North Korea. The more you do with them, the harder it is for them to do those things because the
exactly.
people become richer,
And,
they have more options.
and, and not just to buttress what you just said, and I think proud to U.S. companies shipping their manufacturing to China, human rights violations were at all-time high
Mm,
by the West definition.
mm-hmm.
Now I think it has lowered because of what is required of the Chinese companies.
Right.
I mean, it's not still up to, they're not where they used to be and they're not where they need to be, but
Mm-hmm.
they are in between. And that's the progressive part of looking at, you know what, there's a better way we can do this. So alienating a country because they don't meet your requirement or your standard, people are beginning to realize that this might not be the most prudent way to actually tackle for international relations and foreign politics.
Yeah, and so I agree, and it's hard because what on some level you are saying, listen, China, wherever and this is you made this distinction, and I appreciate that. The government, not the people. The Chinese government is doing terrible things to their people, but the reality is that sanctions and boycotts and embargoes and all that junk just doesn't usually work because they'll find one or two ways with worse people or just as bad to kind of keep things going. But what happens when you open the gates? And I was watching the National Security Advisor this morning from a speech earlier this week, and he was talking about, China's opened up and they're supposed to be better, and they're actually worse. It's like, okay, let's just presume that the Chinese government is worse today than they were 20 years ago. I'm just going to accept it at face value. Is that because the Chinese government is worse because they realize that no one's watching them and they can do whatever they want to and no one cares like North Korea does? Or could it be that the Chinese government actually realizes that if they're not careful, they're going to lose the ship? You know what I'm saying? Like the Chinese government, while they might be cracking down, and we would consider some of those crackdowns, wrong or overreaches or whatever, it's just as likely that they're cracking down because as they've let in democracy or the free market, they realize that their power over the citizens is weakening. And so it's it would be akin to having a kid in the house, and you see the kid going wayward and you really try to crack down as a response to keep him. You're like, oh my gosh, we got to ground him, we got to punish him, and next thing you know, it doesn't work out or it does work out. But I actually think that that a lot of things you see from China, obviously there's culture there, there's a lot of history there. So I don't want to make it too flat, but I do think part of what you're seeing today in China with the government is they realize far better than we do. They have seen it going from really no outsiders to outsiders, and they've seen what that's done to their culture.
Yeah.
We don't see that, and so there's a lot more fear on their side of losing this thing than the West going, "Oh my gosh, they're terrible." We'll keep sending over Starbucks because that's gonna that's going to hurt them ultimately.
The the us versus them that is playing out with China and the U.S. relation, I don't buy it. I wrote an article on it. As per, I know the Trump administration has their own faith about China versus, but in all honesty, China, U.S. is the biggest. U.S. is Chinese largest trading partner,
Mhm.
and I think it would behoove them to make sure that the US stay on the same course because we buy a lot of their product. So to what benefit will it benefit? To what benefit is it to China to sink American economy?
Right.
Does that make sense?
No, it doesn't make sense. And
So all these narratives that comes out, oftentimes it just like doesn't even pass common sense test.
right.
Why would China, even knowing fully well that they love the economy, they love to boost the economy, and they love their trade, very, very passionate about it. And they've not been able to generate enough internal demand like we do. American embrace consumerism. We love to buy, and Chinese love that. I mean, if you talk to China, they still refer to America. If you go to China, and I know you've been to China before that, you go to America, I mean, they still refer to America as a great nation because we buy all their stuff. I mean, with
Mhm.
family memorial
Yeah.
in their largest trading partner. So why would they all of a sudden want to, make want to lose that side?
Well,
It doesn't fit the Chinese mantra. It doesn't fit their philosophy. So
I could
these
see
are
it. Yeah, I
what?
could see it if everything was normal and the
Mhm,
economy was going great, the global
mhm,
economy. But that's not the situation right now.
yeah,
They, China is going to be in a bad spot because you have obviously Africa, the emerging markets in Africa are struggling. South
mhm,
America is struggling because of the COVID-19 impact.
yeah,
Europe's been struggling. So it's not as if the global economy is just roaring and they're saying, "Hey, yeah, China's like, well, we can ship." No, no, everyone is in a bad spot, and if China's not careful, and they've already tried to placate some of the African countries by pushing back the debt service and stuff like that. If they're not careful, they'll find themselves in a spot where everyone will kind of gang up on them. So I tend to agree that there's a lot of saber rattling right now, unless China can convince the EU to really shift to China. But in order to do that, if let me just play that real quick, if China can get the EU to shift between now and the election, then Trump would probably pull out of NATO or something like that, right? And then the EU would not have the NATO support. So it seems that they don't really have a strong hand to play, is my opinion as it stands. Um, but anyways, so I think that I do agree. I think that you have a 400 million middle class in China, And if the Chinese want to stay in power, the Communist Party wants to stay in power, they have to keep those 400 million middle class, right? If they go back down to poverty level, it's over. And
And the
so,
best way to keep them is to continue to produce stuff for
yes,
America
that's exactly right. That's,
and the rest of the world. So all these narratives that are flowing back, and oftentimes, and I'm like, do people actually sit down and think about some of the news that comes out of these outlets? Does that even make sense? But oftentimes, like I said, we do not, we don't want to digest our news. We want the news to be digested to us and feed to us. So
yep.
we've kind of, we live in that era right now. Everything is all about narratives, you know.
No, exactly. Well, listen, I know we scheduled an hour and we are up against the clock. So
Mhm.
we'll get you on again in the future. I don't want to keep you any longer, but tell people in the meantime, first off, I appreciate this. I've enjoyed this every time. We've talked a handful of times now, obviously the first time online, but one of the things I've appreciated from the beginning was your willingness just to talk about issues, and whether we agree or not, there's never hostility. We're just talking. We're trying to learn from each other, trying to understand perspective. And that is just so hard to find today. So I really appreciate that. And I obviously appreciate your perspective, not only being born in Nigeria, being in the U.S., 20 years in the military. You have that's a very unique perspective. Not a lot of people carry that perspective. And so I appreciate that as well. But so tell people where they can find you or more information about what you got going on. And then we'll get you on again in the future to kind of talk to this stuff, because I always love kind of hearing you work through things.
Thank you so much, Ryan, and I do appreciate for coming and for letting me, speak on your platform. And more importantly, is the fact that I don't take this lightly, because one of the things I'm quite passionate about is for people to speak their mind and to share opinions and to have progressive talks. That's the only way we can be better as humanity. We can talk this thing out. Fighting will not resolve. I always tell people, diplomacy is harder than war. People just don't understand. Diplomacy harder than fighting war. Fighting war, you go in there, you kill. But
Mm-hmm.
diplomacy is hard, and
Mm-hmm.
that's why there's a science and art to it. But we can actually develop it by talking just at the lowest level,
Yeah.
just understanding each other. And one of the things that I spoke to you about is the fact that we live in a world whereby everybody wants to shove their narrative down and other people's truth,
Mm-hmm.
instead of just listening to them. I don't have to agree with you, but I hold you as a human to understand you. The more we understand each other, the more we can tolerate each other.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why I kind of cherish this opportunity for me coming on this platform. And more importantly, so if you, I'm on LinkedIn, Adebayo Adeleke, and also you can check me out on my website, www.adebayoadeleke.com. You can share it when you,
Okay.
send the stuff out, adebayoadeleke.com. I'm also on Twitter, Temibayo1. Naturally, it's Temibayo. And on Instagram as Temibayo1. So,
Do
we
this.
would love to
Send
hear
that to
you
me
back.
in the WhatsApp. I'll put it all in the stuff so people can find it. I can't Twitter. I cannot add anybody on Twitter right now. It's so frustrating. I use list on Twitter, and so I had everything list by I have like Africa and China and markets, and then it got to be where just I want them on list when I want lists, but my feed was just so small. So I went and started adding my people from the list, and so I could get my feedback, or I could just check that more regularly. And so Twitter sent me a message this morning, and it said, "I've been banned. I'm not banned from Twitter, but I'm banned from 3 days for adding people." And I'm like, "What?"
What's going on with Twitter
I'm,
these days?
I'm 3 days from just
Wow.
from adding people. I'm like, I all I was doing was adding the people on my list. I mean, there
Wow.
were some people not on my list, but it's like I was basically following them anyways. I don't even so so I will follow you after my 3 day ban. I can interact, but I can't really like stuff or comment or retweet. So once my Twitter timeout's over, I'll give you a follow on Twitter as well.
That is awesome, man. So it's nice to be here. And if you need to, you can hit me up. Like I said, on my uh, on my page, on my website, and also on Twitter, on Facebook as well as Instagram. I'm always there. Chit chatting with people about what is going on around the world. The best way, to make our society better is we can talk this thing through, not to be alienate each other. So.
Exactly. Okay. All right. Listeners, thank you so much. And we will be back, I think tomorrow. So we'll be back tomorrow and we'll talk to you then.